day. And good day, good day. Welcome back. We're coming to you live from the Parliament building in downtown Castries. We have a sitting of the House of Assembly scheduled for today. The Speaker of the House is expected to arrive any minute now, but just want to give you some insight into the floor. In the chamber, we have the Honorable Alan M. Chastanet present, the Prime Minister and the parliamentary representative for Mico South. We also have a seated Honorable Leonard Mantut, representative for Groselay, Honorable Ezekiel Joseph, representative for Babonneau. We have Honorable Stevenson King present, representative for Castries North. We also noted the arrival of Honorable Sarah Flood Bobra, the representative for Castries Central. We have also in the House Honorable Dominic Fedee, parliamentary representative for Ancillary Canneries, Honorable Bradley Felix, the representative for Choiseul, and in the opposition we have present the leader of the parliamentary opposition, Honorable Philip J. Pierre, the representative for Castries East. Also present, Honorable Dr. Ernest Hilaire, the representative for Castries South, and Honorable Sean Edward, the representative for Dennery North. We have papers to be laid today by the Prime Minister and Minister for Finance, Economic Growth, Job Creation, External Affairs, and the Public Service. Also by the Honorable Minister for Economic Development, Housing, Urban Renewal, Transport, and Civil Aviation, Minister the Honorable Guy Joseph, and the Honorable Minister for Tourism, Information, Broadcasting, Culture, and the Creative Industries, Honorable Fedee. And we have reports from the committee coming from the Honorable Minister for Infrastructure, Ports, Energy and Labor, Honorable Stevenson King. Motions to be laid by the Honorable Prime Minister, and we now stand for the arrival of the Speaker of the House.
Let us pray.
Heavenly Father, we want to give you thanks, bringing us through a hurricane season as a nation. Thanks for helping us through this pandemic. We ask for your continued healing, strength, and grace upon us as you continue to minister to us in this land. Almighty God, by whom alone kings reign and princes decree justice, and from whom alone cometh all counsel, wisdom, and understanding, we, thy unworthy servants, here gathered together in thy name, do most humbly beseech thee to send down thy heavenly wisdom from above to direct and guide us in all our consultation, and grant that we have in thy fear always before our eyes, and laying aside all private interests, prejudices, partial affection, the result of all our counsel may be to the glory of thy blessed name, the maintenance of true religion and justice, the safety and honor and the happiness of the Queen, the public will, peace, and tranquility of St. Lucia, and the uniting and knitting together of the hearts of all persons and estates within the same, in true Christian love and charity, one towards another, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. And the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, and the love of God, and the fellowship of the Holy Ghost be with us all evermore. Amen. Report.
Honorable members, this morning I received word from the Honorable Member for Dennery South informing that he will not be joining us in this sitting. Let me take the opportunity to thank the Honorable Member for Castries North, who serve as the chair of the Credit Reporting Committee. Other members included the Honorable Member for Castries East, Leader of the Opposition, the Honorable Member for Castries South East, Member for Swazel Saltibus, and Member for Castries South. I had the opportunity to stop during one of the deliberations, and I was most impressed with the way it was being handled. And I felt that the public should have seen that, although our standing order does not allow it to be broadcast. But I believe that the way it was handled, it was a job well done and comparable to all other select committee meetings I've seen in other jurisdictions. And well, I don't have a hat on, but I raise my hat to the members of the committee for the job that they did. And also to express gratitude to the institutions that made themselves available to make presentations to the committee. And I would like to express my thanks to all. I very much suspect, unless otherwise directed, that this may very well be our last sitting for the year, unless something, we're living in unprecedented times. So let me take the opportunity to say, in considering all things, I think the first word should be safe. Have a safe Christmas. Merry one to you, members, family, and St. Lucia at large. And hopefully we'll have a much better 2021. Statements by ministers. Honorable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, before I make my statements, and while your own statement is fresh in everyone's minds, let me also congratulate the member from Castries North, along with the Leader of the Opposition and his team, for their participation in the committee's report that we'll hopefully be receiving today. But more importantly, and I hope that the Leader of the Opposition would join me in saying that the structure that we have in place now, that we are harmonizing legislation in the OECS, the current mechanism that we're using seems to be inadequate, Mr. Speaker. And I say that because in many instances, the legislation arrives to us where the consultation is being directed by the regional entity, in this particular case, the ECCB, to bring about that legislation. And in many circumstances, certainly since I've been here as the Prime Minister, we find ourselves in an awkward situation in which we're literally being handed a piece of legislation, and being told to make amendments is very difficult because this legislation has already been passed in some of the other states. And Mr. Speaker, I bring this up because it really begs the question of an institution that has been established, but in my opinion, has been grossly underutilized, which is the OECS Parliament. And we have an OECS Parliament in which both the sitting governments and oppositions of all of the OECS member states sit at. And maybe time has come where, for instance, in this instance, the ECCB would have done its preliminary work, and that would have allowed then there to be a debate to take place at the OECS parliamentary level, where greater level of harmonization and some of maybe the concerns of individual states could have been included in the final draft. And certainly we would not be put in a position that something would be passed in other states before it gets to us. So at least everybody, both opposition and government, would have had an opportunity to have seen it. And certainly when you think of the OECS Parliament, maybe some more of the greater ambitions that we had are not as practicable, but certainly in the area of harmonization, that there ought to be a debate in an OECS Parliament, particularly if it's going to be something that's going to be binding to all of us. So I will certainly be making that recommendation at the next OECS meeting, and maybe I will, not maybe, but I will speak to the Leader of the Opposition, and something that maybe he and I could champion collectively out of St. Lucia, and see if we can encourage the other states to do so. And I know that there has been, and I certainly am not going to call anyone out, and I think that the Leader of the Opposition would be aware of this, that sitting governments tend to be very careful and measured in what is debated at the OECS Parliament, simply because there are multiple oppositions. And I'm always very heartened by the fact that both when the former government was in office and now our government is in office, that we make sure that our oppositions are in attendance in those meetings. And I think that St. Lucia has a flawless record when it comes to these parliamentary sittings and having both the government in office as well as the opposition in attendance. But I think that this might give more meaning to our OECS Parliament. And I'm hoping that the Leader of the Opposition, I'm not committing to him right now, but certainly that we can have a discussion as to whether in fact that this makes sense and whether it's something we can pursue collectively together. Mr. Speaker, this morning I have two statements to make. They're actually both related and to some extent. I have a report which has been a long outstanding report, but I think that when you hear the report, you'll notice that the reason for delay in bringing out the report is the complication of the matter.
Excuse me, Mr. Speaker, just to remind you and the Prime Minister that the report, the statement last time was not circulated. The statement at the last Parliament.
So I have two reports to make. One is on the review of our pass-through mechanism for gas in St. Lucia, energy in St. Lucia. And the second one is a review or report on the excise tax revenues from March 16th to October 11th, which would have covered what has the government collected. And remember, we spoke about attempting wherever possible to have an amount in addition to the $4, and that additional amount would be going towards COVID cost. So I certainly wanted to be able to provide to Parliament a full report and account of how much additional monies were collected. And then under separate cover, we'll report as to the excess amounts, where it was spent and how it was managed. So, Mr. Speaker, by way of background, the price of fuel products, particularly diesel and gasoline, have been and for the foreseeable future are expected, let me repeat that, have been and for the foreseeable future are expected to continue to be seen as critical to the economic lifeline of the economy in both developed and developing countries, St. Lucia included. This importance is underscored during periods when prices of these products rise notably, resulting in commensurate injurious impact on economic activity. Given such high prices raise the cost of producing a wide range of goods and services, both directly and indirectly. This higher cost erodes consumers' disposable income and consequently limits their spending power. Volatility in the price of fuel products is also undesirable, as it leads to uncertainties regarding the cost of transportation and other inputs, and invariably the price which consumers would pay for a myriad of goods and services. This is very true, Mr. Speaker, for St. Lucia. So if we look at the bus transportation system, where we have a fixed price on the cost of transportation, a critical input is fuel. So if there isn't an element of control on the fuel prices, it makes trying to manage a fixed transportation cost impossible, and that we would be continuously engaged with the transportation sector on how they are going to be compensated for the losses that they would be incurring. And so it's a very impractical situation, and that's just one example in our system in which we have regulated prices, and those prices are very continuous. So for instance, Mr. Speaker, if we look at LUSLEC eventually had to change its mechanism to allow for an energy surplus, meaning that the energy surplus could change on a monthly basis depending on the cost of energy. Whereas we have WASCO on the other example that does not have that. So in essence, when there is a change in the price of electricity, WASCO is absorbing those changes, but yet they're being compelled by regulations to sell water at the same price. And therefore, it incurs a substantial loss that we still have to figure out how to handle that situation. But these are some of the problems that when you have a huge fluctuation in the price of energy and you have an economy in which there are regulated prices of products. Cognizant of these realities, many governments have attempted to stymie upward price movements and curb the volatility of petroleum product prices through various price control and smoothing mechanisms. The concern related to reducing upward price movements of fuel products and limiting their inherent volatility is common and served as a precursor to the recommendation by the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank for the existing petroleum market pass-through pricing system currently being implemented across our region. The existing market pass-through system currently being used in St. Lucia was seen as the best framework by which international developments in the crude oil market could be translated to domestic prices at the pump. The system comprises two aspects, namely a price build-up methodology and an applicable effective period. These two aspects of the market pass-through pricing system have varied over the years, with each modification affecting both consumers and petroleum importers or wholesale distributors in ways that are not immaterial. The price build-up methodology in the reference period have some periods led to wholesalers of gasoline and diesel in effect realizing margins higher than the approved fixed amounts per gallon in some instances, and in others lower than the guaranteed level. The magnitude of the margin gains or erosion in a given effective period varies by each importer for each product. This irregularity is a consequence of two interconnected facts. One, that the legislated maximum permissible retail price of petroleum product is calculated using an estimated cost. Insurance, freight, CIF price for each product. So this estimated CIF price is based on an average of CIF prices of both importers. So let me stop there for a moment, Mr. Speaker. Because we are trying to establish a price at the pump, it means that there has to be a guesstimate as to what the CIF price is going to be during that period that you're trying to regulate. And so what has happened in the past, Mr. Speaker, is that they look at historical numbers and trends and try to guesstimate that CIF price. But in guesstimating that CIF price, Mr. Speaker, we have two importers in St. Lucia. And both importers always seem to have a different CIF price. And that is in part because of the cost of freight and whatever handling process, because the fuel ends up in the same tank. So you're now finding yourself not only trying to figure out where the market trend is going, global trend is going in prices of fuel, but the two CIF, you're using two CIF prices to take an average. So in doing that, one person's CIF price may be closer to what the real number is, and therefore the gain or the loss will be more or less versus the other one. So I just wanted to make it very clear that it's many moving parts in an attempt to try to get to a fixed price. And its most volatile and largest component of the price buildup. This CIF price informs the maximum wholesale and retail price in the price buildup. However, the CIF price does not fully reflect the respective CIF cost or imported price paid by either wholesaler for the fuel product sold in a given effective period. Two, that the maximum wholesale and retail prices for petroleum products reflect CIF prices of shipments for each importer during the immediate past reference period as an estimate of the CIF cost of the fuel sold during the subsequent effective period. Petroleum products can thus be sold at a price higher or lower than the prevailing current cost to the wholesaler, contributing to a discrepancy between the actual CIF price and the wholesaler, and that estimated in the government's fuel price buildups. The size of this discrepancy is commensurate with the length of the reference period used, with longer reference periods resulting in larger CIF price discrepancies. These differences directly affect actual wholesale margins earned by each importer. When the CIF price used in the government price buildup for a fuel product exceeds the actual CIF price paid by the importer, this results in the importer earning a wholesale margin in excess of the approved amount. So let me put this another way, Mr. Speaker. The current system is that the importers are acting as the consolidators. So all of the revenue that's collected from the pump, less the $1.10 approximately that is paid to the dealer, is controlled by the wholesaler. The wholesaler then is responsible for paying the government whatever the excise tax rate that is legislated. And if in fact there is less money, then the wholesaler absorbs that loss. And if there is an excess amount of money, the wholesaler keeps that amount. And that is what currently has been existing. Similarly, when the CIF used in the government price buildup for a fuel product is below the actual CIF price paid by an importer, this results in the importer earning a margin less than the approved amount. These margin variations are commanded by the fact that during an effective period, each importer usually sells products from multiple shipments with differing CIF cost. So in the middle of a period that we've estimated, you may have new imports coming in with a change in the CIF price, but the importer being restricted to selling the fuel based on the model or the buildup structure that was in place before. An assessment of the historical records shows that the irregularity of importers earning larger or smaller wholesale margins is highest when the disparity between the CIF prices of the petroleum wholesale is high and the valid period for a legislated domestic wholesale price is long. So if we are in a period in which there is a large fluctuation in the price of fuel, and if in fact that is combined with the period of adjustment, so we've had 3 periods of adjustment in our mechanism. We've had one where it was 1 month, we then went to a 3-month, and then now we are at a 3-week. So if you are at a 3-month period, and there are large variations in the CIF prices during that period, it can build up either large amounts of surplus or very large amounts of deficits. And so this is what historically we've learned. Intuitively, such discrepancies may average out over time and subsequently lead to an insignificant impact on the wholesaler and ultimately the consumer. This expectation, however, is not always met and is most adversely impacted in instances where the underlying trend in fuel prices persist for an appreciable length of time, and more so with the infrequent domestic price changes. The irregularity reference can best be explained by way of examples discussed in Appendix C. The duration of the reference period used in the computation of the maximum price of fuel has been altered 3 times, as I indicated, since September 2009, as follows. Every 4 weeks, once a month, which was from September 28, 2009 to May 13, 2012. Every 3 months, from May 14, 2012 to the 11th of January, 2015, and every 3 weeks, from the 12th of January 2015 to present. The internal assessment conducted by the Department of Finance shows that since the market pass-through fuel pricing system was implemented on September 28, 2009, importers have realized a combined net gain of $2.9 million over the approved prevailing wholesale margin. So if we take the 3 periods from 2009 until now, and we average out the pluses and the minuses, the importers would have had collected $3 million approximately in excess of the dollar that they were supposed to have gotten, on dollar per gallon. The excess margin was primarily generated from gasoline, $2.6 million, with a marginal amount of $260,000 from diesel. However, the magnitude of the margin gains or losses varied during the period September 28, 2009 to July 31, 2020. Across these 3 distinct periods with differing frequencies for the domestic prices and excise tax rate changes. So from the period of September 2009 to May of 2012, gasoline, the importers were at a net loss of $5 million. And on diesel, the importers were at a net loss of $2.95 million, for a total loss for that period of $7.95 million. On the period May 14th, 2012 to January 11th, 2015, under the gas, the importers had a net surplus of $11.63 million. And the diesel, they had a surplus of $2.75 million for a total of $14.37 million. And under the current regime of 3 weeks, Mr. Speaker, from January 12, 2015 to July 31st, 2020, under gas, the importers have a net deficit of $3.96 million. Diesel, they have a surplus of $470,000 for a total of $3.49 million deficit. And if you then take all of the periods combined, under gas, the importers have a surplus of $2.67 million, on diesel $260,000, for a total surplus of $2.93 million. From the onset of the market pass-through system, domestic fuel prices were adjusted every 4 weeks monthly. With this frequency during the first period, which spanned roughly 2.5 years up to May 13th, 2012, the importers registered a combined cumulative margin loss vis-a-vis the approved margins of approximately 7.9 million. The average maximum retail price of gasoline and diesel during this period was $13.77 and $13.71 per empirical gallon, respectively. It should be noted that during this period, CIF prices were estimated from use of the mean Caribbean postings prior to the use of the actual CIF invoices from the respective importers. The largest margin variations were observed during the second period, with a modified frequency for fuel price changes to every 12 weeks, every 3 months. From May 14th to 2012 to January 11th, 2015. During these 33 months, a net margin of 14.37 million was computed for the two importers. This overage is largely reflective of the fact that during the period referenced, the CIF price used by the government to compute the maximum price fluctuated only 12 times, while that of the importers' wholesalers changed more frequently per shipment. In the calendar year of 2014, for instance, wholesalers had as many as 19 shipments of petroleum products. This coincided with a period when the world oil prices were high between $80 and $100 per barrel before falling steadily to under $50. So in essence, we had the worst case scenario. We had a long period to assume an average, and you had prices of fuel dropping almost by 50%. And so it makes it difficult during that period. Subsequently, the frequency of the price changes was modified to a much shorter 3-week period, which attempted to have the domestic fuel prices more accurately reflect movements in the world oil prices. So this is the period in which we had the famous Orange March, which many members in this House have referred to on several occasions. And the fact is that what existed was where there was an approved excise tax of $2.50. But because of the dropping in the price of the fuel, the question became, where was the difference going? I think that was the biggest question that everyone was asking. And there were members in the private sector, who shall remain nameless, who kept on saying, well, this is going to deal with averaging out. But nonetheless, where was the money going? So we now know where the money was going. Government was getting its $2.50, but the excess amount was going to the importers. So you would have a situation, Mr. Speaker, in which the price of fuel was dropping, the price at the pump was not dropping, and the difference was not going to the public, but the difference was going to the wholesalers. And I want to make it very clear, the wholesalers were not doing anything wrong. So this is not to lay fault in any way to the wholesalers, but this was the system that we had. And the inefficiency of the system was extremely exposed by these extremes. The extreme of a 3-month adjustment period, and also by the extreme of the drops in the CIF prices over that same period. Computed margin variations appear to be less pronounced under the current 3-week pass-through pricing regime presented above. During this period, January 12, 2015 to July 31, 2020, the two importers together appear to have experienced a margin erosion of about $3.5 million. While aggregate margin loss of $3.96 million was registered for gasoline, there was a margin gain of $470,000 on diesel. It is noteworthy that this period is the longest of the 3 distinct time periods presented in the table above, with a duration of approximately 5.5 years. While the longer pricing cycle is beneficial in smoothing the volatility in domestic prices, meaning if you have a 3-month period, there's a certainty of knowing what the price is going to be at the pump, the methodology used results in either a gain to the importers or at the expense of the consumers, or vice versa, based on the trend in oil prices amongst other factors. Shorter price adjustment periods tend to reduce the magnitude of the variations in CIF prices, and thus margins realized vis-a-vis the approved wholesale margins. The challenge remains in estimating the CIF price used in the price build-ups such that the CIF price variations are further minimized. So, Mr. Speaker, it is clear to see that when we have two importers and possibly a third importer coming to St. Lucia, you then have to average their CIF prices because they're private companies and their purchasing and their cost of bringing the fuel to St. Lucia will vary. And so if you're going to have a fixed price, how do you have an average in which there is equity? Because it cannot be expected, Mr. Speaker, that a private company would have at one period suffered a loss of almost $8 million. Or equally, that the consumer would have paid in excess of $14.5 million for an excess amount in the cost of the price of fuel, meaning the price of fuel was actually lower and the importers would have had that net gain. And then it makes even more difficult when you have two CIF prices and you're taking an average between the two. It means that there's always going to be a winner and a loser. So you have the possibility, not the possibility, reality is that one importer is going to be subsidizing the other importer. So there are imperfections in the current system. And I want to say again, Mr. Speaker, this is not laying blame on anyone. This is what the reality we're facing and as to how do we address the current imbalances. So, the way forward. Given the wide variations in the CIF prices and thus margin gains or losses occurred by importers, wholesalers, there is a need to revisit or modify the current pricing mechanism such that any potential benefits can be passed on to the consumers and or the state. The question is, should the importers continue to be the consolidators? Should they be the ones suffering the loss or benefiting from the gain? Or should it really be a state entity and therefore the guarantee of $1 profit that's been provided legislatively to the importers remains in place, so they only get their dollar. The retailer, the dealer gets his $1.10, and the government gets its excise tax, and there is some kind of intermediary, I believe, that should be state-owned, but that's to be determined. As such, the executive branch of the government is of the view that declared recorded land and CIF prices of fuel products into St. Lucia by the two main importers may not be the most competitive price possible. Against this backdrop, the government intends to embark on a comprehensive study review of the imported prices of fuel into St. Lucia with the objective of, one, investigating whether the prices currently obtained reflect competitive open market fuel prices. As we indicated, we had moved away from using a CARICOM CIF average price to the average prices of the two importers. But there is no mechanism in which we are determining whether those CIF prices are the most competitive. Two, ensuring that the lowest possible prices are facilitated and that they be more aligned with world oil price movements and competitive procurement options in the international market. This review is expected to be undertaken with the assistance of the industry experts from international organizations. The outcome of the study is expected to be of benefit to the consumers and the businesses in St. Lucia. So, Mr. Speaker, again, I just want to say that upon this revelation, I have to say to you, it has taken some time to figure out this very complicated system as to how the pricing mechanism is done, where the surpluses or deficits go, and then more importantly, if in fact that's the only mechanism that we can use or an alternative. So we are intending, Mr. Speaker, to solicit the support of the World Bank and also of some regional institutions and also international organizations that are familiar with the importation of petroleum to assist us in looking into whether there are any better practices out there that we can adopt. And we will obviously make this a document at the House. The second report, Mr. Speaker, as I indicated to you, is a report on the performance of our tax collections on the excise tax during the COVID period, which is March 16th to October 11th. Countries across the region and the globe continue to contend with the adverse effects of the COVID-19 pandemic on their economies, including the tremendous social and fiscal pressures. In the same vein, the government of St. Lucia continues to grapple with these resulting challenges and attempts to strengthen the nation's capacity to manage the impact of this unprecedented twin health and economic crisis. As part of the government's initial response to the crisis, a policy decision was taken to increase the domestic excise tax rate on gasoline and diesel above the previously targeted $4 per gallon, given the dramatic and favorable drop in world oil prices. So in plain English, Mr. Speaker, as we saw the prices globally drop, what we tried to do was to target a specific number where we didn't think that we were hurting the economy, but gave us an opportunity of generating some additional revenues. And knowing full well that the price of oil was artificially low, and the likelihood would be, as we've seen, an increase in the price of fuel in the very foreseeable future. This policy change was announced in a press release titled Fuel Tax and Price Changes by the Department of Finance on April 6, 2020. This policy measure was intended to minimize the anticipated reduction in government revenue in order to contribute to the additional expenses required for the healthcare responses amid the mitigating the spread of the COVID-19 virus. This policy change was supported by the weak prospects for recovery in oil prices in 2020. This report presents a summary of the performance of the excise tax revenue collected from gasoline and diesel since the change in the excise tax policy was effected on March 16th and up until October 11th, 2020. It doesn't mean we're ending it on October 11th, it just means we only have the numbers up until October 11th. Since early 2020, a global demand for oil plummeted as the COVID pandemic has led to an unprecedented contraction in the global economic activity. This reduction in demand led to an excess supply of oil, triggering a brief price war between two major producers, Saudi Arabia and Russia, in April of 2020. These supply and demand developments have contributed to a sharp decline in the international prices in 2020. During the period of March to November 2020, West Texas intermediate U.S. crude oil benchmark prices fell by 38% to an average of $35 per barrel compared to $57 per barrel in the same period of 2019. The comparatively lower international oil prices, particularly in April of 2020, provided an opportunity for the government to temporarily raise the excise tax rate above the previously targeted $4 on gasoline and diesel. This assisted in boosting excise tax revenue collections, whilst the retail prices of both products faced by the consumer did not increase. Initially, retail prices remained unchanged, but fell to levels below the historical average under the market pass-through pricing system, or the average in 2019. The excise tax rate on gasoline surpassed $4 for the first time during the period January to March 2019, and again from March 16th of 2020 to present. It rose to $6 per gallon in April of 2020, the highest rate since the implementation of the market pass-through pricing system in September of 2009. Notwithstanding this high excise tax rate of $6, the retail price then fell noticeably to $11.50 per imperial gallon, the lowest since May 2017. So it means that in addition to the government collecting $6, the consumers benefited from a price at the pump of $11.50. Subsequently, the excise tax rate on gasoline fell continuously to $4.04 per gallon from July 20 of 2020 and fluctuating to a maximum of $4.67 since then. Overall, during the review period, March 16th to October 11th, the excise tax rate on gasoline averaged $4.74, so 74 cents a gallon more than we had when we had the $4. The excise tax rate on diesel followed a similar trend averaging $4.84 per gallon during the review period. On April 6, 2020, the excise tax rate on diesel rose to as high as $6.04 per gallon, while the retail price remained at $12.91 per gallon. Thereafter, from April 27, 2020, the excise tax rate trended downward to the targeted rate of $4 up to September 20th, with a slight uptick thereafter. Following the drop in the late February 2020 to $13.09 per imperial gallon, the domestic retail price of gasoline fell to an average of $12.05 per imperial gallon during the review period, March 16th to October 11th. This represents a decline of 10.3%, partially reflecting the drop in world oil prices. The retail price of gasoline fell sharply on April 2020 by $1.59 to $11.50 per imperial gallon, the lowest since June 2017, when prices were $11.61 per imperial gallon. Thereafter, prices rose to its current price of $12.13 per imperial gallon, while excise tax rates dropped closer to $4 per gallon as the imported price increased. So it's very clear, Mr. Speaker, that the government never had itself fixated on getting $1 or $2 more in the excise tax. What we decided to do was to look at the price at the pump and make a determination to make sure that we covered the $4, but wherever we saw an opportunity where the price of fuel had dropped significantly, was to take some of those gains and put it as a tax revenue to help with the COVID expenses. Since the COVID-19 pandemic, the domestic retail price of diesel fell steadily from $12.91 per gallon on February 24th to $10.44 in June of 2020, the lowest since June of 2017, when the prices was $10.32 per gallon. Thereafter, diesel prices inched up an average of $10.73 per gallon up to October 11th, 2020, while the excise tax rate decreased to and near $4 per gallon as imported prices mostly decreased. Overall, the retail price of diesel averaged $11.35 per gallon during the review period. This is below the historical average of $12.61 per gallon since the market pass-through system, and also less than the 2019 average of $12.95 per gallon. Both gasoline and diesel sales each declined by 20%. So again, Mr. Speaker, just because we were able to increase the excise tax doesn't mean that we were collecting the same amount of money as we were before, because it is not only the rate of the excise tax, but it's also the volume of gasoline or diesel that you're consuming that will determine the total amount of monies that you're going to collect. So consumption was down 20.6% to 7.3 million and 2.9 million empirical gallons respectively during the period March to October 2020 compared to the corresponding period in 2019. Figures in 4A and B of the Appendix A highlight the movements of the sales in volume in 2020 relative to 2019. The most pronounced decreases in consumption in consumption in excess of 50% from both gasoline and diesel occurred in April of 2020. So there was a decline of 50% in consumption of both fuel and diesel. And that coincides with when the country was shut down. Subsequently, increases were recorded in consumption of fuel in successive months, with a jump in September 2020 when in-person school classes resumed, a blight notably below the 2019 levels. During the precise review period, March 16th to October 11th, the actual volume of gasoline and diesel sold totaled 6.1 million gallons and 2.4 million gallons respectively. During the review period, the increase in excise tax rates coincided with a significant reduction in the volume of fuel consumed due to the large economic contraction induced by COVID-19. The gross excise tax revenue thus generated from gasoline and diesel amounted to $28.2 million and $11.2 million respectively resulting in a total gross excise revenue from fuel of $39.4 million between March 16th and October 11th. This outturn translated to additional revenue of $5.7 million over the amount that would have been generated in the excise tax rate of $4 per gallon through the review period. So let me repeat that again. That the incremental increases above the $4 for the period that we have spoken about raised $5.7 million in incremental revenue, as if we had just kept it at $4. This additional revenue contributed to defraying the cost of the additional COVID-19 related healthcare expenditures, such as the cost of operating the respiratory hospital, isolation units, and quarantine facilities. International crude oil prices are projected to remain near current levels at about $47 per barrel as it begins to recover from the slump in March of 2020. Oil prices have been firming up with the expectation of increased demand since the rollout of the COVID-19 vaccines began. Recently, in some regions, there has been an easing of restrictions and slowly rising demand for travel. Overall, oil prices are forecasted to average $39 per barrel in 2020, 35% down from its average price of $56 in 2019. Notwithstanding the upward trend in fuel consumption, particularly in Asia, global oil demand is not expected to fully recover pre-COVID-19 levels before 2023. Factoring potentially restrained OPEC and oil production and a still fragile world economy, the U.S. Energy Information Administration forecasts that oil prices will rise by 16.5% to U.S. $45.78 per barrel in 2021. The government of St. Lucia will continue to monitor oil price developments very closely and announce any further policy changes with respect to the excise and domestic fuel taxes. And again, all the charts and are here, Mr. Speaker, very detailed in terms of on a monthly basis and in comparisons to 2019. And this is really to satisfy the promise of a report of the government's excise tax policy during this period.
Papers to be laid. Honorable Prime Minister and Minister for Finance, Economic Growth, Job Creation, External Affairs, and the Public Service.
Speaker, I beg to lay the following papers standing in my name. Statutory Instrument Number 191 of 2020, Fiscal Incentives Stone Cultural Limited Order. Statutory Instrument Number 193 of 2020, Resolution of Parliament to authorize the making of an order for the 2017 supplements to the revised edition of the laws. Statutory Instrument Number 194 of 2020, Finance Administration Act, Resolution of Parliament to authorize the Minister of Finance to borrow from the Export-Import Bank of the Republic of China to finance the COVID-19 response project. Statutory Instrument Number 195 of 2020, COVID-19 Prevention and Control, Prohibition of Assembly Number 4 Order. Statutory Instrument Number 196 of 2020, COVID-19 prevention and control, physical distancing. Number 4, order. Statutory instrument number 197 of 2020, gaming, racing, and betting amendment regulations. Statutory instrument number 198 of 2020, gaming, racing, and betting bond and security instrument regulations. Statutory instrument number 199 of 2020, fiscal incentives, elite medical imaging, EMI Incorporated, order. Statutory instrument number 200 of 2020, fiscal incentives, plastic solution limited, order. Statutory instrument number 201 of 2020, 2017 supplement to the revised edition of the laws, commencement order. Statutory instrument number 202 of 2020, Public Procurement Act commencement order. Statutory instrument number 203 of 202, fiscal incentives, 3M Artisan Products Limited. Statutory instrument number 204 of 2020, fiscal incentives, CPAL Holdings Inc. amendment order.
Honorable Minister for Economic Development, Housing, Urban Renewal, Transport and Civil Aviation.
Do I stay here or do I go?
I beg your pardon?
Mr. Speaker, I beg to lay the following papers standing in my name. Statutory Instrument number 192 of 2020, St. Lucia National Housing Corporation, Larry Shoes, Viewford, vesting order.
Honorable Minister for Tourism, Information Broadcasting, Culture and Creative Industries.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I stand to lay the following papers standing in my name. Statutory Instrument number 205 of 2020, Tourism Stimulus and Investment, TTS Resorts Order.
Reports from committee. The Honorable Minister for Infrastructure, Ports, Energy and Labour.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the following report standing in my name. Interim report of the Special Select Committee of the House of Assembly appointed to consider and report on the bill shortly entitled Credit Reporting.
Honorable members, information reaching me that we will have to suspend the House for the next few minutes. Prime Minister has an urgent need to deal with. So we will stand, the House will stand suspended for the next. Honorable Leader for Catherine, please move the motion.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to request a suspension, a recess for 10 minutes.
Honorable members, the question is that the House does stand suspended for the next 10 minutes. I now put the question. As many as are of that opinion say aye. As many as of a contrary opinion say no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. House is suspended for the next 10 minutes.
December 2020 has just suspended, now 11:58 a.m. Stands suspended for the next 10 minutes. And the word we're getting from the Speaker of the House is that the Prime Minister needed to excuse himself to attend to an urgent matter. Again, the House stands suspended for the next 10 minutes. I want to remind you that today's sitting constitutes constituted up until this last minute. Prayers, announcements by the Speaker of the House, and we were in statements by ministers and papers being led by the Honorable Prime Minister and Minister for Finance, Economic Growth, Job Creation, External Affairs and the Public Service. Also the Honorable Minister for Economic Development, Housing, Urban Renewal, Transport and Civil Aviation, the Honorable Minister for Tourism, Information, Broadcasting, Culture and Creative Industries, reports from committee by Honorable Minister for Infrastructure, Ports, Energy and Labour. There are two motions down for consideration for today's sitting. The motion by the Honorable Prime Minister and Minister for Finance, Economic Growth, Job Creation, External Affairs and the Public Service, and be it resolved that Parliament by affirmative resolution approves the draft value-added tax amendment of Schedule 3, Number 2 order, which amends Schedule 3 of the Act to exempt imports by an elected parliamentarian for the benefit of children, the vulnerable and needy persons in the constituency of the elected parliamentarian, of toys, of food supplies, care packages, including items for personal use such as food, personal hygiene products, and other personal protective supplies, gift items, including personal presents to be given as part of the Christmas holiday season, Christmas decorations, including Christmas lights, ornaments, and accessories used for decorative purposes during the Christmas holiday season. In another motion, be it resolved that Parliament authorizes the Minister of Finance to borrow from commercial banks sums not exceeding 85 million EC dollars as follows: Royal Bank of Trinidad and Tobago EC 4,400,000, Royal Bank of Canada 5,600,000 EC dollars, First Caribbean International Bank $8 million, Republic Bank EC Limited $12 million, $5 million from the First National Bank of St. Lucia Limited, and Bank of St. Lucia $50 million. All of these are in EC currency. The bills to be brought to the House one is in debate right now, the Credit Reporting Bill and the Economic Substance Amendment Bill. We will see the first reading for that piece of legislation, both being forwarded by the Honorable Prime Minister and Minister for Finance, Economic Growth and Job Creation, External Affairs and the Public Service. You are reminded that the sitting of the House of Assembly has just now at 12:58 a.m. been suspended for the next 10 minutes, and this is because by the indication of the Speaker of the House that the Prime Minister needed to excuse himself to attend to an urgent matter. The House is scheduled to resume in 10 minutes. We'll take you back to studio on standby.